Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. I wanted to provide an update with a couple of very troubling pieces of legislation. Today, we brought in our legislative director to do that, Rick Travis. Rick, how are you today?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me on.
But before we get into that today, I wanted to remind you to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. It really helps with the algorithms to get this message out there. We need to get it out to as many people as possible, especially for this legislation, because we're going to have to advocate against it. And by commenting hashtag CRPA for the win, you do enter a chance to win the Springfield XD for the 10,000 subscriber promo that we have going on. And also, right before we get into it here, I wanted to let you guys know a little bit about the Police Credit Union. As the trusted financial partner for 70 years to law enforcement and their families, your membership helps continue the support of law enforcement officers throughout the state. As a member, you'll have access to all member benefits, including checking accounts with ATM fee rebates and no monthly fees, certificates with highly competitive rates, auto loans, home loans, online technology with 24/7 banking convenience, and much more. And don't forget, the credit union is now extending memberships to CRPA members. So join today at www.thepolicecreditunion.org. The link will be in the description below, and continue to discover the benefits of membership while supporting law enforcement officers today. All right, Rick, so we have a couple of pieces of legislation, and I'll be honest, these two pieces of legislation aren't just like a bummer or troubling. These are the kinds of pieces of legislation that just really kind of piss you off. I wanted to go over both of them with you. You got Senate Bill 452 on micro stamping, and you've got AB 262 on youth camps. So I actually wanted to start with you on youth camps because I know that you have been very involved in youth camps throughout your entire life. So can you go ahead and let us know exactly what's in this bill? And also, how it's probably going to shape out if it's passed.
Sure. Assembly Bill 262 is another one of those at face value. If you just read the tagline, it sounds innocuous, but it's anything but. 262 puts together a report, which a lot of people are like, well, why are you so worried about the report? And the reason is this report will be used, I'm going to argue, treacherously against not just youth camps, but this is what I call backdoor legislation. And here's why, Kevin. Bringing it down, this is a bill that's been around for about 4 years. It started out as a bill called Roxy's Law. There was a little girl named Roxy that was in Senator Portantino's district that died tragically during a youth camp in a pool incident. And so the result of that was a proposed bill that went after everything imaginable in camps, from high rope activity to swimming pools to equestrians to shooting ranges to basketball court, like you name it, it was in there. That bill has been dwindled down, and now Assemblyman Holden has it. And the bill now focuses on three things. The number one thing is shooting ranges, and then it goes to equestrian activities, and then, of course, swimming pools, and no longer called Roxy's Law. And what it proposes is for the Department of Social Services, DSS, that they would have a stakeholders group that contains the health department and several other departments across the Department of Education, et cetera, that would come up with a list of rules and evaluations of what insurance, what training, what equipment, everything surrounding these three different types of activity types. The challenge with that is they don't have the experts in it. And when you really look at what's going on, we're facing a situation where we're looking at, just take shooting camps. Shooting camps have not had any incident at all for like decades. In fact, just at looking at trap shooting, we've had like 2 million trigger pulls, no incidents. Compare that to a football camp. Most football camps have at least one ambulance showing up at some point during the camp to take a kid to the hospital. I'm not advocating that we have legislation on football camps. That's not my point. But if you've got Sport A that is having routine ambulance visits, no suggested legislation. You have Sport B that for decades hasn't seen an ambulance, and all of a sudden it's coming to watch. there's something more at foot. And what's at foot is trying to go after ranges, because the Department of Health, as an example, has a lead group. They're going to look at lead, and then they're going to say, well, if we found on ranges where camps were at, and this is at, we're coming for the bigger ranges. They've already attempted that before, but this is just another door. They don't have the experience to evaluate what it takes to have the proper range personnel and things like that. But they're going to now come in and they're going to add fees and inspections into an area that hasn't needed it, to be quite frank, has been very good. And when we went back to the author, several of us to argue, this is ludicrous. Why are you doing this? And they're like, well, because it's time. And so again, this is just more of trying to crush the next generation, because most camps, if you look at it, operate on a 3 to 6% profit margin. And that profit really isn't a profit. I hate that word, because the vast majority are nonprofits, and that is money that barely covers overhead and the seed money. Because when you run a camp, as CRPA runs a couple of camps a year, we all know you have to buy stuff 6, 7, 8 months in advance for a camp that's going to happen down the road. You have to have seed money to do that. And so there really isn't a profit margin, but with this, it will create fees and a structure where camps will have two choices: shut down or shut down the program. And what the holder's like, hey, we're not trying to shut down camps. No, they're trying to shut down a specific program, and it happens to be shooting sports.
Right. So the political ideology is certainly showing through in this specific piece of legislation. You have that sentiment of don't fix it if it ain't broken, but that doesn't really count when you're talking about a political ideology that doesn't want to see the next generation of gun owners. And that is, I mean, a huge we always say this, right? That's a prominent part of the firearms community, is firearms safety within training. And that is something that you don't really get a whole lot of in, your other sports per se. I was kind of curious though, something that I read into this, which, you're talking about bringing different stakeholders together to formulate these rules and regulations. This isn't really the only bill that Sacramento is doing this. And aside from the firearms community, we see a lot of mismanagement in California. Is this just sort of a general trend of our legislature today? You see it with this bill, you see it with Senate Bill 2, where they are shifting authority to people who really don't specialize in this, which means, if it's not obliterated outright, it's going to be completely mismanaged. Is that just like a trend that we're seeing?
Well, there's actually a couple of trends, and one of them that's very, I guess upsetting would be the best word that I could choose to use politely on a video like this, is that I think we are seeing our own community not standing up and being outraged. I mean, when I look at the comparison of, you tell somebody they can't have an accessory for their AR-15 or M4, which I completely understand why they get upset, but we're seeing a concerted effort to go after our kids. Just a second, guys. Come in, lay down, both of you. Sit. They're like spoiled children. All right. The concerted effort we're seeing, Kevin, is that it's a focus definitely to go after the kids. We saw last year in 2571, where they pretty much annihilated a person who has spent, the same dollars a family has for Little League has been spent, sometimes even more, for bringing somebody up into shooting sports to get a scholarship, to go to college, to be able to do things. And there they are getting ready to go to college, and the colleges are like, hey, we can't come in because we're going to get fined, tens of thousands of dollars every time we put out a notice to the kids. We've seen numerous activities with the youth be killed because there can be no advertising. Well, firearms companies, ammunition companies, outdoor shooting sports companies, part of the reason that they donate is to advertise. And that's true across the board, anything. I don't care if it's cars or whatever. When the governor and the legislature are so disingenuous to say, oh, well, this is part of some cabal. Well, I'm sorry, then what's a Subaru commercial with 4 Labrador retrievers in it. Hey, Subaru loves dogs, so buy a Subaru. They're marketing to a segment of the population that loves their pets, and that's something that we accept around the world that's done, but not in California. If it's something the governor doesn't like, he's going after it, and he's going after our kids. And I'm really shocked at the lack of public outcry of the Second Amendment community to say, leave our kids alone. Our children are being attacked by various political ideologies across the board, but specifically in our context, they're telling kids that they have no right to be there, yet they glorify this stuff in film with their leftist people. And I think it's high time our community become outraged.
Well, I think there's definitely a place for, Second Amendment programs within the community where that can take place. It's just about, the level of expansion and the level of involvement really becoming part of people's everyday life. I think that's attainable, though. So, we're certainly going to continue and strive to work towards that. And it really all comes with knowledge, right? And, speaking of knowledge, holy cow, man, we just had this lawsuit, Boland v. Bonta, which is a challenge to the handgun roster. When the state appealed the decision to the Ninth Circuit, they decided to leave off microstamping, and I think now I know why. Do you want to go ahead and discuss Senate Bill 452, exactly what it is?
Yeah, I think one of the things you have to look at is the players in this little game that's going on. So you've got Rob Bonta, the Attorney General, that many of you probably don't realize, but he is already setting up his gubernatorial campaign to take over his boss's seat in 26. And so he is taking platforms that the governor has used in his mind successfully. One is the anti-gun platform, and he's doing this. And so Bonta wants to take what's seen as a perceived Newsom failure, i.e., I lost on the Bonta Boland case, I lost microstamping if you're Newsom. Bonta is saying, no, I ditched out of that because I have in my back pocket my good friend Senator Blakespear and Senate Bill 452, and I'm going to come in and do microstamping through that bill and show that we can win on that. And so he's playing a longer game because that sets him up for his election, and that's what this is about. It's not about public safety. And in testimony, I can tell you right now, I have pushed in Senate testimony on this bill since day one of three main factors. Factor number one, the person that was credited with inventing the idea of microstamping has said emphatically, it doesn't work. It was a dumb idea. There are too many loopholes. Fact number two is that we have people like the Brady groups, the Giffords groups, all throwing out wild numbers. And here's the wild numbers. Evidently, they found the DeLorean somewhere and it went back to the future. Because what they will tell you is by having microstamping, it will solve 90% of the firearms crimes. How do you know what anything will do with a percentage until you've actually done it? And so they put this out in testimony, newspapers reprint it. And I'm here to tell you, number one, no. And here's a simple way this is a problem for any of us that have firearms. You go to your local range, you're shooting your firearm, your brass is coming out of your semi-automatic pistol, it's landing on the floor. One of three things happens. Either A, you are very, very good, you keep your floor very, very clean, and you pick up only your brass. B, the place that you are at picks up all your brass. Or C, your neighbor, because some of your brass doesn't stay right underneath you and goes to the left or right of you, and your neighbor's area picks up your brass. You don't know who your neighbor is at a shooting range. That person could pick up 6, 7, 12, however many pieces of brass that has your microstamp on it, Kevin, go do their heinous deed, pick the brass up that they use, and drop your brass at the crime scene. Guess who law enforcement's going to come to look for? You, and you weren't even there. It wasn't your firearm, but they're going to throw a bunch of things at you. Well, if you weren't there because you have an alibi, your firearm was there because we had the brass. And this is going to cause so much court clog, so many mistrials. It's not funny. It's not helping. It's hurting the system. And the final thing is, it's an additional cost to everybody because the only firearms that would be able to be sold after July 1st, 2027 would have to have microstamping on it. So and now further goes against what we're trying to do on the roster case by limiting what can be here. And secondly, they're going to try to grandfather and say, well, now you can't have this firearm for your CCW. You can't do, you won't be able to use anything you've ever had before. That's where they're headed. This is, again, it's just, a gun grab by 1,000 cuts.
But just to be clear, I mean, right now, because of the Boland case and because of the lack of micro stamping within that appeal to the Ninth Circuit, technically right now, you are not required to have micro stamping to get your firearm on the roster, right? And what this bill would do essentially is include it right back in there in the Unsafe Handgun Act to have micro stamping required for the roster.
Right. So basically, their tactic on their side is, okay, guys, have this deal, continue to spend money on the Boland case, and we're not going to appeal this one section called microstamping. Instead, we're jamming it through another piece of legislation. The governor will sign it, and now you're going to have an entire other case to handle the microstamping issue.
Well, I'm just sort of curious, so I know that people are people, right? People can get things wrong. That would indicate that technically speaking, our court system can get something wrong. But is there any kind of recourse that we can take here? I mean, is it all at the ballot box? Because you literally have a federal judge saying something is unconstitutional before the legislature is creating a law that they know is unconstitutional. There are plenty of new regulations that they try to pass every year that we look at them and say, that's unconstitutional. We know it, you know it, but it's not affirmed by the courts yet. This is actually confirmed by a judge saying that microstamping is unconstitutional. What's the recourse that we have here? Is it the ballot box, or what else can we do?
Yeah, it's the ballot box. A lot of it is talking about the waste of money that goes on in places like Sacramento, but it's not just Sacramento. It's local boards of supervisors, local city councils. It's part of the reason, like you, I'm out there in the public talking to people about the upcoming elections. The elections have already started. Anybody thinks otherwise, it's just self-deceptive. And it's also about starting to get good people to run for office. And, people say my vote doesn't count. There are several, not just one-offs, several different areas where people won seats as high up as the assembly by less than 100 votes. So, and that was in strongly Democrat areas where people said it can be flipped. It can be flipped, but we need good people to run. And, I'm tired of hearing people say, well, if I was in office, I would do this. Well, then run for office. And if you've got good legs on your campaign, we're going to support it because we want to see the right people in that are defending the Constitution of not just the United States, but of the state of California, which both of those constitutions are very favorable for two-way people.
Well, we're seeing more and more of these situations as elections continue to happen throughout the country. I think the most recent one was either a seat for assembly or maybe it was a senator in New Jersey. People called him the ham sandwich candidate just because he didn't even campaign. All that he did was put in his $250 to run, and he ended up winning because he came out that he was, that he had specific ideology. So this definitely can happen. I agree with you, especially at the lower, forms of local government as well. But we're going to keep an eye on this. We're going to continue advocating, so that we can get this info out to as many people as possible.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to that, what you said, Kevin, because I think this is critical. A lot of people are like, okay, so what good is a city council, board of supervisors race, et cetera, et cetera. But, you can look here in California, there are several communities where there is a strong city council or a strong board of supervisors that has stood up against Sacramento and said, not only no, but hell no, and they're winning. And so this is why people have to start looking, because those people, when they term out those lower offices, are going to go up the ladder. And that is what the opposition has done for decades. And now we need to turn that tide. And we can do it by ballistically going after every single seat possible for over the next 4 years and changing the political landscape. It's being done in many other states. So anyone says it can't be done here, again, is deceiving themselves, because California has flipped several times. And in the last over 150 years, she's been a state.
And we're going to continue as we see Sacramento, honing in on our rights to keep and bear arms. This is going to be a critical campaign as people cut their teeth, in the local government to move up. We're going to continue and support the ones who support our Second Amendment rights. Rick, thank you very much for taking the time. I can't wait for the next one to hear updates on some of this legislation. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, and thank you for everything you do, Kevin.
And if you'd like to see more content like this on Second Amendment litigation, legislation, and culture, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. It really helps with the algorithms, and we're trying to get the message out to as many people as possible so that they can have the Second Amendment on the top of their priority list when it comes to voting in the next election. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.